I mean, I was at the TCU game, man. Y'all are going to love that kid. I mean, that's when I fell in love with him. He was doing between the legs dunks like it was no problem in the warm-ups. I was blown away. Like, that's when I knew.
Yeah.
I'm like, shit, like this guy like came out of nowhere.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Big Easy Sports Talk podcast. Nick Garisco here, along with Michael Pelichet, and in this week's local episode, we're going to be talking all things Pelicans draft. And to do this, we're bringing back a very knowledgeable guest. Richard Stayman is here. Richard is an NBA analyst who writes for MavsDraft.com. We actually had Richard on before the draft, and we extensively covered his top 20 NBA prospects. But that episode was a little overshadowed, unfortunately, by the Anthony Davis trade, news of which broke literally seconds after recording that podcast. So today we're happy to bring him back on, and now we're going to analyze all of the players that the Pelicans did select in the NBA draft last week. Remember, if you like what you hear today, you can become one of our best friends by subscribing to this podcast and giving us a great rating on iTunes. And you can follow us on all social media at Best Podcast NOLA. Let's tip off with the Pelicans' second big trade of the week. Just hours before the draft, the Pelicans traded pick 4 overall to the Atlanta Hawks for picks 8, 17, and 35, while being able to dump Solomon Hill's expensive contract. And with pick 8, the New Orleans Pelicans selected center Jackson Hayes. Richard, you suggested Hayes as a possibility for our pick in last week's podcast. Not only that, I believe you actually had him as the 4th best overall player on your board prior to the draft, which of course now is music to our ears. Talk about what you see in Hayes as a prospect.
Yeah, so I had Hayes as the number 4 prospect. So, I mean, you really still got value by giving up your number 4. You still got the 4th best prospect in my eyes. You're getting a guy who right away he's going to be a rim runner who probably shoots an unreal percentage at the rim. Maybe not the greatest defender right away, but I think he can still be good. Someone I've seen as a comparison for him is kind of DeAndre Jordan, like when he was starting to develop into his own when he was in LA. But yeah, no, you're going to get a guy who, I mean, pick and rolls all day on offense in the half court. You know, he's going to run in transition. He's super athletic. I mean, he's going to be blocking shots. There's a great defensive core set up now with him and Zion just ruling the front court.
If you had to, I mean, so you said DeAndre Jordan as a comparison. So to me, you had said that Hayes basically is new to basketball. Is that correct? Yeah.
He started, I think, fully playing when he was 16 or 17.
Yeah, and so with that in mind, I mean, one of the things that I was looking at, because I'm doing all this sort of analysis retrospectively on Hayes, I saw that he didn't generate a whole lot of assists, and I know that how much of that is a function of his role, how much of that is a function of him being new to basketball, and is that a concern moving forward? Is he a guy who's not a particularly high IQ player, or is he someone who's just still assimilating into the game because he's new to basketball?
I wouldn't say he has low IQ by any means. I'd say it's like pretty average, which is not bad at all. I think some of the vision issues may have been because of just the team overall. I remember there's a few times where I think I tweeted some videos a long time ago. I'll have to resurface those. But where he's making quick passes out of rebounds. Like he's got decent vision. It's just the team around him didn't necessarily perform. It was one of the worst jump shooting teams in the country too, which didn't help for, centers are often kicking out to the perimeter. So I think he's going to make some strides there. By no means is he ever probably going to average more than an assist or assist and a half in his career, but he's still going to be able to make the right reads. And, he's not going to be a ball stopper. He doesn't really get a ton of tunnel vision or anything like that. But with the learning the game, I mean, there's really not much of a better group to learn it from. I mean, you have Zion, who's the best young player on the team. And then you have Drew Holiday, who's going to be an excellent mentor for him. And I can't wait to see what those two do together in a pick and roll. Like, that's going to be just unreal.
Yeah, so Hayes was a Texas Longhorn, right? And he has huge size. He's 6'11". I think he has a 7'4" wingspan. And I've been reading that he posted a school record 70. I think he almost hit 73% from the field. And I think a lot of that was thanks to a vast majority of his jump shots coming inside 3 feet. I think I read somewhere that over 50% of his technical shots were actually dunks. And he only needed 23 minutes a game to get 2.2 blocks. So this guy seems like he has a lot of athleticism. And what I like to see when I'm looking at the numbers here is that he shot 74% as a free throw shooter, which is I think that's very impressive for a guy his size. We've also seen clips on Twitter of him kind of jumping from the free throw line and making windmill dunks and stuff like that. And the one thing I want to touch on here is, and ask about really, is that after the draft, it seemed like in pressers, it seems like Alvin Gentry and David Griffin were kind of honing in on the fact that Zion and Jackson Hayes are going to be one of the most athletic front courts in the NBA already. Do you think this is true, and do you think that there might be an issue of drafting a player who is maybe more athlete than basketball player at this point? And at the same token, I know I'm asking a bunch of questions here. I'm also curious how long you think it will take for him to reach his potential here.
Yeah, so I think athletically, I think it is one of the best athletic front courts combinations really in the NBA, especially because a lot of athleticism is everywhere, but yeah, there's really nothing like that combo right now. As far as for him coming into his own, I'd say probably by the end of his rookie deal, you'll know if he's going to be really hitting his potential or not. I think I'd lean towards yes personally. I mean, that's why I have him number 4 on my board. But he's already so smart in the pick and roll, which is for a center probably the most important element that you can be highly knowledgeable in as a player, especially someone who's so raw. So I'm not worried about that. And then what was the other 2 questions?
How long do you think it's going? Well, you mentioned how long you thought it was going to be by the end of his rookie deal, but I'm also curious. What is the playing time that we're expecting this season? Like the impact immediately here that you think he's going to be having with the Pelicans, or is this a guy that you might think only really gets limited minutes per night until he really develops?
Yeah, I'd lean towards limited minutes, 15 to 20 maybe, for a good portion of the beginning of the season. And then depending on where the playoff race is going and everything, because the West is just so wide open, that's when you'll really start telling. I think ultimately, no disrespect, of course, but I mean, I don't think many have the Pelicans as a playoff team, after losing Davis and everything like that. So if they're, in the middle of the pack, kind of, 30 wins, not 30, I guess 25 wins, 30 wins. I don't know what that projects to at the All-Star break. But basically, if under 500, I mean, there's a good chance that you could see a big minutes increase for Jackson Hayes going forward. And that would probably lead to a very high, much higher usage and higher just overall per minute production that way. Because, I mean, he's going to just destroy, blocks everything. He's an amazing help side defender. He's going to get so many opportunities in that department. That's really, I think, where the biggest jump would be blocks per game.
As far as projecting forward, I mean, do you see someone who is just going to be a rim runner and nothing else on offense? Do you see someone who could develop into a short roller with a floater game? I mean, that's just something that I'm curious about. And actually, one of the reasons I am curious about it is really what Davis developed into as he kind of fit into his role. Was he sort of developed a game outside of the rim, and it really I just opened up so much. And I don't know how you can block a floater from a guy who has whatever it is, like a 9'2" standing reach, and he's on the move. And if you have a guy chipping away at his roll or something like that, who's smaller, it's almost impossible to defend. I mean, is that a realistic possibility moving forward, or is he just a guy who's going to run up and down the floor, be an awesome pick and roll guy and get to the rim and nothing else?
I think he develops more than just the rim running. The floater's a really good point. I think that's actually where the the free throw percentage projects towards. So, free throws percentage generally leans towards jump shooting success because, good touch and everything like that. I think actually for him, it's more likely for him to develop a really strong floater free throw line in game rather than him developing any perimeter aspect. And then his touch is just, I mean, he shot 80%, I think, at the rim, like a hair under at college. So he's got the touch. Like, I think he can easily develop a floater. And that would be, like you said, with his size and athleticism, it's not going to be easy to stop him.
At risk of sounding like a casual fan here, I was watching the draft, Richard, and I couldn't help but notice this guy, when you first look at him, he looks very tall and lanky. I mean, just to be blunt about it here. However, you start watching highlights of this guy, you start watching, you put on the tape and you watch some of his games, and you can tell, you can see the athleticism there, which is good. He's not just a tall, lanky guy who's been blocking shots because of his height and his wingspan and his, Michael mentioned his standing reach, which is incredible. But it's not just that. I mean, the guy is athletic. He's got great timing. He obviously has a touch on a lot of his shots. But it does concern me, though, just kind of looking at him, just the eye test here, it looks like he does need to put on some muscle. Do you agree with that assessment? Especially, I would say, especially in the upper body, actually. Do you agree? It almost seems like he might get pushed around a little, and I think you kind of see that often because some of these guys are so young, and they haven't been in an NBA weight room a lot. But do you think that he stands to put – I don't want to put a number on it. I'm sure the Pelicans training staff will do that. But was that a problem for him in college? And do you think that he's going to need to put on some weight in the NBA?
Sorry, that's one of my big flaws for him. Is just that he needs to add strength. There were times where I believe it was against, I want to say it was Kansas. I don't know if it might have been someone else, but there was a big center who just absolutely bullied him. It happened every once in a while, probably once a game at least, where he was just out-muscled, whether it be on rebounds, which I think is a big part of why his rebounding numbers were so low, or whether it was just in putbacks, like if someone got the board, he tried getting position back, but he just wasn't strong enough to hold him off. So those are areas that he really has to work on. That, and I'd say that and working on his left hand at the rim, that's pretty much his two biggest flaws he has to improve.
What about Richard? So kind of getting off that question and moving towards so if he is packing on that kind of weight, I mean, one, as it is right now, do you see him as someone who's going to be able to defend the perimeter at the NBA level? And then two, if he is going to be adding that weight, do you think that's going to inhibit his ability to do so?
I don't think it would inhibit it at all. I think he can definitely defend the perimeter. There was one play I saw in person against TCU where he got his ankles broken, like he was, on the ground and still blocked the shot at the rim. So recovery ability is like incredible. He moves so well on the perimeter. I've seen him switch and guard point guards out there and hold his own. I think that's really what separates him from a lot of these big centers is that he can fully go out there. He moves with them. He's so smooth of an athlete that it just translates to the defensive side.
That's awesome. Well, I'm pretty much done with questions about him, so I'd like to transition to Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So a guy who I had very little familiarity whatsoever with before we drafted him. I've heard that he's sort of a high floor kind of guy, maybe not a particularly high ceiling. What is your general take on both his floor and his ceiling?
Yeah, so Alexander Walker is someone, I'm not that high on him just because of his lack of high-end athleticism, explosiveness, and I really don't like his jump shot form. I'm not a fan of guys who shoot to the side of their head, with very few exceptions. And big part of that is I've seen a lot of times where closeouts from the right, since he shoots from the right side of his head, they really impact him. So if someone's coming from the weak side, I mean, he's in a lot of trouble on that. However, he has the frame. He moves so well defensively. Like he's really, really going to make a living on that end. My comparison for him, unfortunately, wasn't exactly as high as you probably would like to hear, but I put him as Frank Ntilikina, the combo guard who you don't really know his position. He isn't a really great shooter yet. Could be a really good defender, but needs to work on ball handling. Just simple things like that. I'm really unsure how to project Alexander Walker, honestly.
It seems like he's one of those jack-of-all-trades guy, but not great at really anything, but just was a quality college basketball player, a lot of different aspects of the game. He averaged 16.2 points a game, 4.1 boards, 4.0 assists. He almost averaged 2 steals a game in college, which is good because the minutes are less. He had 1.9 steals, half a block a game, and 1.7 threes a game. So, playing for Virginia Tech last season, he seemed like one of their best, probably their best player there. And I want to say that the emphasis here on this pick was probably versatility, because it doesn't really seem like kind of like you're suggesting, it doesn't really seem like he has that that dominant quality that he was able to use in college and really wrap everyone around his fingers and just kind of assert his will at one particular area of the game. It kind of just seems like he was very versatile, overall good college basketball player. And, I don't know what his specialty is going to be in the NBA. How do you think that you mentioned Frank Ntilikina. Do you think that he's going to be like that? Kind of strikes me as more of a defensive point guard, if you will, I guess. Is that what you think his specialty is going to be in the NBA if he has one?
Yeah, and from this is my issue with him is that he's a shooting guard who isn't the greatest shooter, and he's kind of a combo guard, but kind of not. His fit is just so awkward with that. People I've talked to say they don't see him as a point guard. He's probably a shooting guard first, so which bodes well that he can play with Drew. If he can just be a spot up shooter, camp in the corners and everything, I think that's honestly his best role. But yeah, 3 and D is probably where I see his ultimate ceiling being.
Do you think that, so you mentioned that he doesn't have high-end athleticism. Can you think of any NBA prospects at some point, before they actually entered the NBA, where you had similar concerns about them, but then they wound up transforming into better players than you anticipated?
I'm sure there's a few. I value athleticism a lot just because, the whole league, everyone is just super athletic. It's just who is able to live on it, who isn't, and, who knows how to use it in certain times. But I actually cannot think of any off the top of my head. Is there anyone you're thinking of?
The one that I was curious about was, and again, I don't really follow a lot of college. I was wondering if Brogdon was sort of in the same boat. A guy who had some sort of reputation as a winner, someone who was really, really good in college and who wasn't necessarily projecting to be a star in the NBA and wound up being a very good player. Do you see any similarities there, or do you think that that's totally, that's just an entirely different case of basketball player?
I think Brogdon, as much as I guess actually kind of did have concerns with him. His jump shot, I did not like it one bit coming out of college, and he just had a 50-40-90 season. So, I could be completely wrong on this. Maybe, they fix some of it and at least make it a little bit quicker. Shoot at different points of his release. I don't know. They could really work with it, and that's actually not a bad comparison for him because off guard, really good defender. Can probably hit open threes. I don't think he'll ever be 50-40-90, of course, but that's actually not a bad comparison.
I guess I'm looking for some hope, and not that it's a bad thing. He's a 17th draft pick. There's a reason that 16 other guys were taken before him, and that doesn't mean he's going to be a bad player. It doesn't mean he's going to be a great player, and we certainly don't want to walk into this podcast thinking, tell us all the good things and not the bad things. I'm glad to hear that you don't think, particularly highly of him, because that will color my analysis moving forward. And I think that's the way it should be. We should be realistic about the way that it's we should extrapolate based on what we've seen, not based on what we want to see.
Not to be confused, he does have a quick first step. I'm looking over my notes again, and that is something that's probably his best athletic tool. It's just how quick he is, and on the first step, it's just overall quickness. Not so sure, and vertical athleticism not sold on. Just to clarify that, so I wanted to clear that up before we moved on to the next prospect.
A lot of these picks I know there's always these stories about how you can be picked anywhere in the draft and make a huge difference for your franchise. And they brought up where Drew Holiday was drafted 16th or 17th. They brought up where I think Kawhi was 15th or something like that while we were watching the draft, and they're trying to give hope for everybody. But the truth of the matter is, and the hard truth is, that once you're past, a certain point in this draft, usually it's in the top 10, most of these players really don't pan out the way you want them to. And that's just, there's always exceptions. Of course, there's always exceptions. However, the reality is that a far number, more players than a lot of fans think just do not pan out, whether they're picked in the first or the second round. And it really starts to take fold after the top 10. So it's just one of those things to where, even if you can say all the positives in the world about Alexander Walker, and you can bring up the negatives too, but the bottom line is he's probably, just historically speaking, number 17 overall pick, he's probably less than 50% likely to actually pan out as a great pick. So again, the odds are against him just from the surface standpoint before you even get into breaking down the player. But yeah, Richard, I appreciate your breakdown on both of our top picks in the draft here. I want to move away from the Pelicans for a bit because I know you're an NBA draft analyst and you really have no affiliation with the Pelicans whatsoever. And that's one of the reasons we brought you on, because you're going to be so objective here. But I have to know, because of your expertise on all the NBA draft in general, I have to know what were some of your most surprising picks of the draft?
I was really surprised to see Bol fall. That was really stunning.
Oh, yeah.
I think the most stunning, though, was Nick Claxton falling to the second round when all of a sudden, he shut down non-lottery workouts a week or two before the draft. He got the green room invite, just all of it skyrocketed, and just for him to be picked 31st was really weird smoke. And then also Brandon Clark's fall. That was, I didn't think he would get past 17. I thought y'all would be the team to take him. And then Indiana passed on him. I was really, really confused as to all of it. And then Memphis, they had an overall really good draft. The whole Southwest, it is going to be back to, what was it, like 5 years ago, when everyone was just so good, when it was like 45 wins the whole way through the division. That's what we're looking at again, I think.
And what were some of your favorite picks of the draft? Picks that just made total sense, maybe in the top half of the draft there. Picks that you kind of expect to flourish with their new teams.
I like PJ Washington. I'm really big on him. I think he was the exact kind of high floor, high ceiling guy Charlotte needed. Helps their front court with their issues up in that end. I really liked, I still cannot for the life of me say his name, I'm sorry, but Cabin Jelly, his first name is just, I can't say it. I thought that was a really good pick for the Clippers, considering they really don't have anything to lose. So they reunited, the FSU guys. And then one other pick I really liked was Keldon Johnson at 29. I know you said the first half, but I expected Keldon Johnson to go 15 to the Pistons. I had heard, that they really liked him, and which makes sense, though, because apparently they're looking at him at 30, because the second that pick came in, they traded it away, their 30th pick, which was the very next pick. So I really liked those. And then if I had to choose one other in the top 10, or top 15 I liked, honestly, it's Jackson Hayes. I thought that was such a good deal. I thought Cleveland would take him, but they decided they wanted to. I don't know what Cleveland's doing, so.
Yeah, they drafted another point guard, right? And they had just picked Colin Sexton last year, and I know they have a little bit of different skill sets, but it still seems pretty strange. Lastly, and I'm sure Michael has another question, but I wanted to add, we mentioned Jackson Hayes again, and I think that's what the majority of the Pelicans fans want to hear about, other than Zion Williamson, of course, who I'm shocked we haven't even mentioned his name yet in this NBA draft, this Pelicans draft podcast. But I think we've covered Zion enough here. But Jackson Hayes, I think a lot of maybe casual NBA fans might be concerned about the idea that it seems like the classic center, like the old classic shot blocking center, is kind of becoming the way of like the fullback position in the NFL, like the dinosaur, where we're seeing there's less and less of them, or fewer and fewer of them in NBA teams, and a lot of NBA teams are actually, trying to circumvent or move away from the your traditional center position because it slows their offense down, and all these other reasons that it kind of affects the matchup. And it works both ways. Sometimes you can say that, you got to put a big center in to cover another big center. But we've seen teams like Golden State try to move past, having a classic big center. And at the very minimum, we've seen teams kind of, when they do put that traditional big out there, that traditional five, it's only for, 15 minutes a game or something like that. Do you think that kind of hurts the value of taking a what looks to be a traditional center, even though he's a great athlete, at 8 overall?
I don't think so, especially given the fact that, Toronto won with Marc Gasol, who was decently close to a traditional center, I think, in the NBA. Obviously, he shoots threes, so not traditional in that aspect. But I think it's okay just because the teams who win the title, I mean, teams are following their suit with some exceptions, of course. So if Toronto's coming the norm, I think really, I think they're okay. I think having a center is fine if you know how to use them, and if they're not, obviously you don't want, dare I say, someone who's gonna, be a pure post scorer. I know y'all just picked up Jahlil Okafor's extension, obviously, but even then, he's not exactly what he was coming out of college. So having someone who just knows how to go to work quickly, I think that's just as valuable. I think the center position is not dying like people think it is. I just think they just have to add some more to their game is all. So I think if Hayes gets that jump shot, that the free throw percentage indicates, you're looking at a good chance for him to be a modern five.
Yeah, and I think too, it's really I think it's a good answer because I really don't. I think there's definitely something to what Nick's saying about certain brands of center dying, and I think one of the main things is where you see the perimeter immobility just absolutely murders your team's defense. Like someone like DeMarcus Cousins trying to defend the perimeter for 20, 25 minutes a night, it's just a nightmare. And I think it's less so of an issue for someone like Jackson Hayes if he's what you are saying he's billed to be. I mean, that's phenomenal. A guy who can actually protect the rim for you, but has a switchability like someone like Kevon Looney to actually step out and defend the perimeter as well, and to be a lob threat on offense. I mean, that's pretty exciting, and I'm looking forward to this. This is really great.
Well, now I'm nervous that I've overhyped Jackson Hayes. Y'all got me really scared here, so I'm going to have to make up for it in some way.
Yeah, just be more pessimistic in the future. We'd appreciate that. Yeah, that's it for me, man. Nick, do you have any more questions?
No, that's it. Richard, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to wrap it up right after you sign out here, and we appreciate you coming on, always knowledgeable, and we definitely want to have you on again in the future. Maybe when the Mavs start having some draft picks, we'll be able to get – no, I'm just joking. Once the season starts and everything like that, we're going to be really happy to have you on again, and thank you so much for coming on. That was good to get Richard's assessment both before the draft and after the draft, so we knew it wasn't an unbiased opinion here. He clearly likes Jackson Hayes a lot. He wasn't so high on our 17th overall pick, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Michael, what did you think about his assessment of our players?
I mean, I think it excited me. The questions that I really had about Jackson Hayes were, was he going to be able to defend the perimeter? And then also, is he someone who could develop into something more than just a basically rim-running big? And I think if you're looking at the way the NBA is trending, and we've talked about it a little bit already, you really have to be careful about guys who will get run off the floor at the end of playoff games. I think you should be somewhat cautious about paying those guys a lot of money. But I think it's not dying as quickly as maybe it's being, I guess, portrayed to be. And so at some level, even if he isn't someone who you're going to want at the end of the game, 5 or 6 years from now, I think he could still develop into enough of an asset to be traded elsewhere. I think most of the time you're much more likely to overpay a wing than you are a big or a little guy. I think usually you can get enough from the big guy or the little guy to justify the contracts you hand out to them, at least more so than wings. I think wings are very, very commonly overpaid.
I think ultimately this was a risk, right? Just from objectively speaking here, he seems like an all upside, potentially low floor type of prospect here. His size and athleticism combo is obviously elite, and it's worth taking a gamble on. And I think one of the reasons that the Pelicans were able to take this gamble was because when you trade a king's ransom and you get a haul for Anthony Davis, you're able to end up with a bunch of assets. And the more picks that you have, the more risk that you can take during the draft. So I think the Pelicans felt like, because we have all these other picks and because we've gotten all these other assets, we can use some of these picks to take, high ceiling, low floor players who are either going to be boom or bust. And that's how Jackson Hayes just appears to me. Now, we'll see what happens when the games unfold. Maybe he's just totally going to shut me up, and maybe he's just going to be this great basketball player from the get-go. But it seems to me like kind of I don't want to call him a project because I think that's an insulting way to put it. But he seems like a long-term kind of player where we're just kind of trying to hone in on his athleticism and develop him. And, maybe we do. And in that sense, it'll be incredible if we do. I mean, we could end up getting a really game-changing type of talent here. However, I think one of the main reasons we were able to take this risk, and I do think it's a big risk to take a prospect like this, who's a little, who we have to work on a little, I would say. It was kind of alarming to me that I think I read that 72% of his shots were within 3 feet. And, that's, no matter how you slice that statistic, that kind of just means that he needs to be developed. Now, I'm not saying he can't be developed. Obviously, he's got the free throws percentage going for him. It looks like he has some touch. He's very athletic. But to me, ultimately, this seems like a boom or bust pick that we were able to make just because we had all these assets and allowed us to take more risk in draft.
I think that's right. And I like the way that you put it. I hadn't really thought of it that way. I would say that in general, my opinion of sort of building an NBA team is that players who are fairly good are not the ones who are going to change your time. It's great to be able to put, to be able to find talent where someone else doesn't find it, and maybe like a high floor guy who doesn't have the ceiling. But I think if you're talking about building some sort of dynasty or just even sustainable success, I think that starts with your top talent. And like you're saying, would I rather someone like 8, pan out like Jackson Hayes, and then maybe a year or two later we draft some duds? Or would I rather have 3 guys who are all pretty good, and then we pay them pretty good contracts? And I think the answer to me is overwhelmingly, I would rather have that top talent. So if you get 2 or 3 guys like that, I think that's how you build winners. And then your franchise obviously has to be good enough to continue to surround them with players that can fit within our salary space and also produce. But I'm excited to see what happens, and I think it'll take some time. Like you said, I don't think he's going to be paying dividends right away. And if I had to guess, here's what's going to happen. I think he's going to put up really, really good per minute stats when he actually plays. And I think people are going to get really excited because they say, well, if you just extrapolate this to 36 minutes, he's averaging 3.5 blocks per game and 11 rebounds and whatever many points. But it's going to be because like he's playing 10, 15 minutes a night, working really hard and getting a bunch of, and I say garbage buckets.
Hustle
I don't
stats.
mean that they're not valuable. Stats. Exactly. Hustle stats. And that's perfectly okay. That's how Diallo is. I think he's going to be a lot better than Diallo is. But I guess my point is I don't think he will be developed enough to be a contributor on a good team right away. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think eventually he could wind up being exactly what, Richard's hoping that he'll become, and a guy who can actually defend the perimeter, add something to his arsenal besides just rim running and actually put in a floater game and stuff like that. And if you have that kind of mobility with that kind of athleticism as well, I mean, that's a real asset. And someone who, if other teams are going small and you have someone who's got a 7'4" wingspan and 9'2" standing reach, standing against someone who was 6'6", 6'7", and he can defend that guy, but the other guy can't defend him, I mean, that's going to be something special. So, I'm excited. I want to see what turns out.
Yeah, it's a star-driven league, right? So it's okay to swing for the fences, especially if you have more draft picks than other teams. So it's okay to use some of those picks to swing for the fences. I think a great analogy of the draft is, and we just already talked about on this podcast, that most of these picks end up not panning out. That's just the fact of the matter. And I think if drafting is like throwing darts at a dartboard, you never know what you're going to land on, but the more darts that you have to throw, the higher your chances are of hitting the bullseye every now and then, right? So, and that's kind of how I evaluate draft. It's really just about accumulating assets and having more picks because, quite frankly, these guys are never sure things, right? Even some top 5 picks don't work out. So plenty of them don't. So it's good to just have more darts in your pocket and more ammo in your arsenal to be able to take more swings like this. And I think Jackson Hayes is a boom or bust pick, and hopefully he ends up panning out in a big way. And speaking of stars, though, like we can't end this podcast without talking at least a little bit about Zion Williamson. I got to ask you, how nervous were you when the Pelicans were on the clock at pick 1 overall? I know everybody expects Zion Williamson to be the number 1 overall pick, but I got to say, I was pretty nervous. Were you feeling the same way?
No, I really wasn't. I actually was like, it's weird to say this, but in a draft where we were getting Zion Williamson, and again, like a prospect that I think is probably the best one since Davis, I wasn't nervous at all. I didn't think they were going to do anything to mess this up. I felt really good about it.
I must have lower expectations of New Orleans sports than you do, but I was just waiting. I was just waiting for not that obviously any betting man, including me, would have put money on picking Zion Williamson, but there's always that off chance, that crazy scenario where I was just really excited when we actually made the pick, and I think the rest of New Orleans was too. It looked like they had a great turnout for the draft party, and I love that Zion Williamson has already been to 2 or 3 really fancy restaurants in New Orleans, including Commander's, with the team brass. I love that he's already done a charity event with Alvin Gentry. He did a summer basketball camp, and I think he dunked in front of everybody. It seems like he already has a great relationship with Gail Benson, and it seems like he already has a great relationship with Alvin Gentry and David Griffin. And this, to me, reminds me of Drew Brees. Like, Zion Williamson seems like he is taking the place of Drew Brees, as Drew Brees kind of has 1 or 2 years left before he kind of rides away in the sunset, as they say. It seems like Zion Williamson is being handed the keys to New Orleans to be New Orleans' next big superstar. And we've talked a lot about this, and you've mentioned this especially, Michael, where you've said on this podcast where Anthony Davis has always been a star for the Pelicans, but in terms of being a star like in the limelight and kind of being that overall leader and guy that, he's kind of marketable, but it seems like Zion's going to take this to a whole nother level. And I'm just excited because, to me, this really reminds me is Drew Brees is kind of passing the torch, really, to Zion Williamson as being the most beloved athlete, arguably person in New Orleans.
Yeah, and the thing that I really took away from the draft is I was absolutely stunned at how incredible of a person Zion appears
I forgot to mention that.
I think
so humble.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I mean, the way that he handled that interview and just how genuine he was with his mom. And I mean, whenever I watch anything on TV, I wonder how much is scripted. There was no doubt in my mind that was not scripted. Zion just appeared to be someone who, yeah, he was bawling. And just, I mean, it's just great for a guy who's so physically imposing and it's awesome. Like he's both someone who's got the fire to be your leader, but someone who also values the people around him, the people who've supported him for his entire life. I was blown away at how awesome of a person he seemed to be. And like you said, I believe that he truly is sort of poised to take over that mantle. And I'm looking forward to see what we get from him. So
and he had such a great press conference. The day after the draft, he did hours of really press conference, and he had a bunch of good quotes about New Orleans. And this is all dating back to right after he was taken, right after he gave that really powerful, emotional speech about his mother and about how thankful and blessed he is, and how he couldn't believe any of this. He said someone asked him in the interview right after the draft, right after he was picked, they said, what do you think about going to New Orleans? Are you excited? And he said, let's dance. And that's already being, let's dance is already being, put on T-shirts and everything like that. And I just think that was a perfect, maybe not slogan, but a perfect thing to say for New Orleans just because of their culture and music, jazz music, everything like that. It just really resembles New Orleans really well. I think he's going to fit in really well here. And during all those press conferences the next day, it seemed like he was really more taken by and more infatuated with New Orleans than it seemed like, or the media had us believe after New Orleans won the lottery.
Yeah, I think so. I really, again, everything that I've seen from him so far just leads me to believe that at this moment, he's just everything that I would want in an NBA star. So, we'll see what happens. I certainly have very high expectations for him, and I just can't wait to see him play. And really a guy who, like you said, I had a harder time rooting for Davis. I've always, thought Davis was a great player, and he seems to be a decent enough guy. He doesn't seem to be. I didn't demonize him for wanting to leave here. I think that was a reasonable thing to do. But someone like Drew, who really stands out, just an awesome character, I always thought was a lot easier to root for, and I think that's the case for Zion too. I think this is a guy who is really, really easy for me to root for.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to see him play.
Yeah, I also loved, I'm, going on and on about my man crush with Zion Williamson. I totally sound like a fan here, but I also loved that when he was asked about, kind of the hype, honestly, in one of his press conferences there, he said, well, I think people might need to settle down. I haven't even played a game yet. So basically, it was just a very humble response to saying, hey, listen, I got to prove myself on the court before I deserve all of these accolades. And that's kind of what he said in his answer. And I really like that because he's one of those players where he's a very confident person. And he balances that line between knowing that he's a great basketball player and having all of this ability in his skill set and wanting to be the best. But he balances that line with not being cocky and arrogant so well. And he's actually extremely humble, and he just seems like an overall great guy. It seems like he's going to be a great leader for this city for many, many years to come. And it is just so amazing that we were able to win the NBA lottery and have a chance to get this generational prospect.
Yep, I agree.
And that'll wrap up this week's local episode. Thank you so much for listening, guys. And thank you to our awesome guest, NBA analyst Richard Stayman, for coming on once again. You can find him on Twitter at MavsDraft. And you can also find us on all social media at Best Podcast NOLA. We'll be back next week. Tell all your friends, who dat, and let's dance.